Linux is a great platform to do game development on. It is much more internally consistent and straightforward compared to Windows, and it allows you to have a faster workflow by using the keyboard only. It also has gotten much better, since there is more Windows software compatibility and game compatibility through Steam's Proton. Various alternatives to Windows-only apps have also gotten much better, and as a result, more and more people are interested in switching to Linux. On YouTube, many channels, even those that are not tech-related, are making videos about switching to Linux. The small upfront time spent learning Linux is much less than the time spent on dealing with Windows updates, telemetry, ads, your settings being changed, and having to stay up to date with all that Windows is doing just to debloat it. And with how much it's gotten better, now is the best time to give it a try. Here are the features that I found most useful as a developer. Now I'll talk about the Linux file system. Before using Linux, I didn't understand how Windows worked. So I didn't understand how the file system was laid out or what things did. And anytime I wanted to find some settings file, I had to search in the start menu. On Linux, your configuration files for various programs will be stored in /home/your username /.config. The file system starts at /, which is the root of the file system, and everything descends further down. As a developer, you'll be frequently interacting with various configuration files. Having a clear structure is very beneficial. Linux has something called Symlinks, which is basically a shortcut to a file or folder. This is useful if you want the same file or folder to be accessible through different paths. Let's say you have a documents folder and you want that to be stored on an external drive. One way you can do this is use a symlink. So you delete your documents folder in your home and create a symlink in its place to link to the documents folder on the external drive. On Linux, some distributions mount your storage devices on /mnt by default, but it could be mounted in other places. You can mount a USB drive in your documents folder or in your pictures folder. So if something is saving stuff in your pictures folder, it won't know that the pictures folder is actually stored on a different drive. To a program, it'll just appear like a folder on your system. You can also create symlinks to files. Let's say you have an asset and you want to reuse it across different projects. You can create a symlink of that asset in the project so you can have many projects sharing the same files. Linux allows you to use encryption on your drives. During installation, many distributions have an option for full disk encryption. On Windows, this isn't an option in the installer. This feature should just be a default on every operating system. Because if your laptop gets lost or stolen, then your files aren't protected without encryption. For desktops, this matters a bit less, although it's still important because desktops are more protected. I talked about file systems on Linux. There's also different options for file systems you can use. By default, most distributions use ext4. It's good, but it doesn't have any more advanced features. Something more modern is btrfs. Some distributions have it by default, and others give you the option to use it. But for an external drive, you could put whatever file system on it you want. btrfs allows you to create snapshots of your file system. You can set it up to create a snapshot, for example, every day, and keep them for 7 days. So if you accidentally delete something or overwrite something, you can go back to a previous day and restore your files. These snapshots take up barely any space. If you changed nothing on your drive and it takes snapshots, those snapshots will be basically free. Multiple snapshots share the same files. Now, there's some software that works on Linux but doesn't work on Windows. Or just software that works on both Linux and Windows, but just works so much better on Linux. If you're a developer, most of the things you're doing should be done through the terminal, because it's just much faster. For example, you can easily edit files and create scripts and run them. Here, I have a terminal file manager opened, and I can create and run a Python file really quickly. I created a Python file and ran it in just a few seconds. I can also manage files really easily. I can create new folders, copy them, and rename them. Doing some things like renaming files manually, like if you want to change the number on the end of the file, will take quite some time through a GUI file manager. A terminal file manager may take some time to learn, but you'll be zooming through your files when you know how to use it. Another cool thing about Linux is that you can use tiling window managers. There's two types of window managers. There's floating window managers, which is what you would see on Windows, where you open an application and it opens in a window. And you can drag that window around, you could arrange all your windows however you like. This is a really tedious process because you have to use your mouse for everything. Using a tiling window manager, for example, I can open a new desktop, and let's say I want to open GIMP. So I can open my application finder, type GIMP, and open it. Then if I want to do other things like open Blender, I can do the same thing. I can open Blender. I can open a terminal and arrange these windows however I like. So I could put one to the side. I could maximize one and then minimize it, switch to different applications. This all can be done really quickly using the keyboard. You can also switch to different desktops with just the push of a button and open applications on them. So I can have a different application on each desktop. You can do similar things with Windows, like you can press Alt-Tab to switch between desktops. But you have to find which desktop you want to switch to. On Linux, you can set up a keybind to switch to a specific desktop. You can configure it to be quick, where I have no animations and everything switches immediately. Or you can add animations if you want. Going back to your terminal, you can install various command line utilities and use them on Windows. You can install Python and run Python scripts to a terminal. But it's cumbersome. On Linux, if, let's say I wanted to install Python, I could just type a command. So I can type in Python. And I want to install Git, so I can type Git. Why not install everything? I could install all of this just by running this command. Of course, it may be different depending on which distro you use. On Arch Linux, the package manager, so the command I'm using to install this, is called pacman. On Ubuntu, it's apt. And different package managers have different commands to use them and may contain different software. But the majority of developer utilities can be installed really easily. On Windows, if you wanted to do the same thing, you would search for Python, make sure you don't accidentally click an ad, download Python, open the installer, click through the installation steps, and then you have it installed. Some programs might be even more complicated to install, and you might need a tutorial to understand how to do it. As a developer, you may try out and learn various programming languages, frameworks, engines, and tools. Having the ability to install them with one command is very powerful. This is not just apps you can install with this command. You can install desktops, different tiling window managers, different system utilities, and different tools to do specific things. Like you could use FFmpeg to convert videos from one file format to another, or ImageMagick to convert a PNG to JPEG, for example. Without these tools, you would have to open your browser, search for something like convert PNG to JPEG online, and go to some random website. With these tools, you can do all of that entirely on your computer. You might need to learn how to use them, but these days, AI can help you with that. It can help you write a command to convert a PNG to JPEG, for example. And make sure you understand every command you're running. It doesn't matter if you got it from some forum or from AI. If you're not careful, some commands can break your system. Like, you wouldn't just go on Windows and delete system files. That can break your installation. The same way, like you wouldn't delete random files on Windows, you wouldn't run random commands that can delete various things. And make sure to check the files you're referencing in your commands. So let's say if you're converting PNG to JPEG with a command line utility, that you don't accidentally overwrite the wrong file. If you're interested in Linux and want to switch, here are some things you should keep in mind. Even if you're not ready to switch, I also recommend doing some research on Linux and see if it can improve your workflow. Otherwise, if you're not ready to completely get rid of Windows, you can still dual boot. So you can put Linux on one drive and Windows on another. You may not want to put both Windows and Linux on one drive. From what I've heard, Windows does not play nice with dual booting, and it may mess up your Linux installation. Many distributions allow you to run Linux and try it out through a USB without installing it. So you can see if the apps you want to use work, and then shut down and nothing on your computer has changed. So this allows you to try out various things without messing up your Windows installation. I see many people holding back from trying Linux because they have a NVIDIA GPU. Linux works very well on NVIDIA GPUs. I have an NVIDIA GPU and I don't have any issues. This might have been a problem in the past, but this is no longer the case. Before you switch to Linux, the first step is something you can do on Windows. That is, figuring out which of your apps can run on Linux. If they don't support Linux, to find an alternative that does. Software compatibility on Linux is much better now than it is when I've started using it 6 years ago. There's much more alternatives to popular software, both open source alternatives and proprietary alternatives. Much software you can run through the web browser. You can run Microsoft Office or Zoom or other of these apps instead of having to install it. Then the software just works on every operating system which has a web browser. Also make sure that your hardware is compatible with Linux. There might be some issues with your motherboard, with your Wi-Fi, or other things. Most things just work. As I said, you could use a live USB to test out if a particular distribution works on your device. There's also lots of open source tools to make your hardware work. For example, there's OpenRGB, which allows you to control RGB devices, and it supports many different RGB standards. So you could use one app to control all of your RGB devices. There also might be issues with configuration software to configure your mouse or keyboard or some other peripherals. There might be some open source software that can configure them, but not always. Let's say you actually want to migrate to Linux. One thing I would recommend is to put all your files on an external drive. This applies to both Windows and Linux. So even if you don't choose to migrate, it's still a good thing to do. If you ever need to reinstall your operating system, you could just unplug your external drive, install your operating system, and then plug it back in again. You don't have to move your files because your files are always on the external drive. This way you can also test out various Linux distros really quickly, because you don't have to move your files off your drive each time you want to install a different operating system. When you're picking a distro, it might be a bit overwhelming, but remember that Linux distros are really similar. They all use the Linux kernel, they share the same utilities, they share similar applications. At the core, they're the same. They just put a different desktop or theme on top, or have different apps pre-installed. So you can customize Linux and change from one desktop to another. Many distros are also based off of each other. So Linux Mint is based off of Ubuntu. SteamOS is based off of Arch Linux. The main considerations for picking a Linux distro is how easy it is to install. So if it sets up the desktop you like. Otherwise, you could just find something else that already configures your system the way you like it. Pick one that has a good package manager, because the package manager dictates what software is available in the repositories. Many Linux distros are very easy to install, and most of them are actually probably faster to install than Windows. You just boot into the USB, you go through the options, and that's it, you're installed. Linux is also much smaller. There's less bloatware packed into the operating system. It can fetch all the system files and install them really quickly. Even distros that were known to be hard to install, like Arch Linux. Before, to install Arch Linux, you would have to follow the Arch wiki and type all the commands and go through the installation manually. Now, you could use the Arch install utility, and in the terminal, you just use the arrow keys to select what you want installed. If you're a game developer interested in Linux, there's just 2 distros I would really recommend. There's more out there, but these are just personally the ones I've used. You can try Linux Mint if you want something that sort of resembles Windows. Of course, it won't completely replicate the Windows experience. There'll be a few Linux and Windows differences that you need to be aware of. But Linux Mint is very familiar. It lays things out like Windows. It uses the GUI to configure various things. Then, if you want to go further and you want to really customize your workflow, I'd recommend Arch Linux with a tiling window manager. I'm using Sway with Waybar for the bar at the bottom, VIFM for the terminal file manager, and Rofi for the application launcher. This will take more time to set up and learn, but you'll get a much more productive workflow. I recommend you use a Wayland desktop instead of Xorg. Xorg and Wayland are sort of like the protocols that your desktop and apps use to create and manage your application windows. Wayland is the new one, and distros are switching to it. So in the end, give Linux Mint a try and see how well your apps work on a Linux. Then you can switch to Arch Linux and dive much deeper into Linux.